Welcome everyone to Tattered Cover, a virtual event series we are doing throughout this pandemic. We're an independent bookstore here in Colorado, and I know I already saw someone from Wyoming, so thank you for joining us all the way from Wyoming. If you don't know anything about Tattered Cover Bookstore, we are 50 years old this year. We're Colorado's largest independent bookstore, and we are expanding. We're a lucky bookstore that we're actually expanding during this time. We just opened a new store right next to where the Rockies play baseball at Coors Field. So if you're ever in town, please check out our new McGregor Square location. Before I go any further, I want to inform you that there is closed captioning if you need it or want it. There's a black bar at the bottom of your screen that says CC on it. Just click that button and closed captioning should pop right up. If you're a fan of Tattered Cover or want to learn more about different authors, please check out tatteredcover.com/event. We have so many virtual events still happening until we move back in person. And another one coming up, it's actually on Friday. It's by Channy Kwok. He is a travel journalist, slightly different than Douglas Chadwick, who we have here tonight. But I think if you're a fan of travel and the outdoors and everything, this Friday, Channy Kwok. Tonight, I am so excited to introduce the author of Four Fifths a Grizzly, excuse me. We have Douglas Chadwick here. He has a master's degree in wildlife biology. He has written 14 books. He's written a few for Patagonia, which Four Fifths a Grizzly is coming out on. He is up in Whitefish, Montana. I am so proud. Douglas Chadwick, please, you can unmute yourself. Let's get you here in front of your readers.
Howdy. Yeah, thank you, Adam, and thank you, whoever you are out there in Zoom land, for taking the time to join us. So do you want me to dive in? I don't have a lot of introduction. I'd like to let the book speak for itself.
Yeah, definitely. Let's dive right in, and then I'll follow up with some questions. I know you want to read some bits and show us some photos,
Sure.
So take it away.
Yeah. All right. I'm starting off reading, do not be afraid. This is not going to go on long. I'm going to switch over to some photos after that. But Four Fifths a Grizzly starts this way. Everything in a natural system is connected. This isn't a platitude. It is the principle that explains how a mineral orb wheeling through the vacuum of space became wrapped in creatures, became a biosphere with mushrooms that glow in the dark, kaleidoscopic dancing spiders, puppies and kittens, 6-foot-long salamanders that both bark and mew, Komodo dragons that reproduce by virgin births, jellyfish capable of reversing the aging process and existing forever, chimpanzees with nearly 99% of the same genes we own, making tools in an African woodland, and so many microbes that they outnumber the stars in the known universe. That's life. So I can get rid of my glasses and I can go share my screen, okay?
Definitely.
Here we go. Let's see. The only problem for me, Adam, is, I just can move this. And then, there we go.
There we go.
Okay. I am now screen sharing. I need to get, I won't even bother with the first one. I want to make sure I can advance. I'm not.
I think if you just hit like the right arrow on your keyboard, it should go through everything.
Well, that's so kind of what I was thinking, but it's not working. And it worked when you and I tried it just before we started this. What do you suggest?
Maybe if we just don't have it full screen, which I know isn't ideal, but
that's fine.
We can at least see the photos, and then you can click through it.
Okay. How do do you minimize me or do I do it?
Let's double check. I can stop you real quick, and then you'll have to
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, now try it again.
Yeah, let's try it again.
Okay, here we go.
And then
hang in there, folks.
It's technology. Yeah, and I think this is we won't make it won't be as big, but I think if you can go through the photos this way.
Yeah. I just might leave them like that, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Oh God, I'll have to just click through them. Okay. The grizzlies are definitely featured in this book. They're my totem, my icon. I spend a lot of time watching them. I live near a bunch of them in Glacier Park and the Bob Marshall Wilderness here in the Rockies. Raised 2 kids in a cabin with the densest grizzly bear population in the lower 48 around us. And I work a lot in Alaska, especially along salmon streams. So I've had grizzlies come so close that one actually, a subadult, brushed against my chest while I was pinned against a rock. But it was looking over his shoulder at a bigger bear. That was its concern. So I know a bit about them, and I'm drawn to them because when I'm in grizzly country, that's kind of my guarantee of pure air and good water and an intact wild community. And to me, they symbolize the best of nature and the wildest of nature. But the book is not 4/5 about grizzly bears. It's about the nature of nature and our relationship to it. So in addition to the great bears, I am also 4/5 an elephant, the largest land mammal, which has a brain 3 times the size of ours and lives as long as we do and has an equally complex social life. It's very altruistic, very caregiving towards other members of its group. There are 4,600, give or take, species of mammals on this planet. 1 out of every 5 is a bat. And people don't know them well, and a lot of people don't care much for them. But I'm a 4/5 a bat, like it or not. I'm also, thank goodness, 4/5 of a hopelessly cute red panda. I am 98% identical genes with a chimpanzee. I'm about 50 to 60% with fish, 20 to 30%, up to 40% with insects. And by the way, those trees in the background, these are fireflies, of course. And those trees in the background, I am about 20 to 30% identical genes with them. We share those genes. I'm about 30% of banana and 24% of wine grape. I'm 18% of baker's yeast, and I am 7% of bacterium. So it's a different view of nature. And this book is about my extended family. By dint of being human, I'm also part of all the other creatures that we all see and the invisible ones. Let's see, I'm getting ahead of myself, so bear with me. But I did want to read one more thing, and that is this. Because of the genes I do share and the adaptations that we have in common and the needs and survival skills that we have in common, I could say I am in a sense alive in a mind-boggling number of creatures in a staggering range of environments through shared DNA. I leap, I twine, I fly, I slither and ooze, I shimmer with iridescent scales in the seas off Zanzibar, and I stretch my petals towards the light in far northern Siberia. Being more closely related to avocados, ants, and aardvarks than most people might suspect doesn't dilute our stature as humans, but instead increases it many-fold. It renders us more than human. This is our deep heritage and old enduring kinship as big as the living world. And why am I making a point of this? Well, it's because we stand to lose a quarter to a half of all these species by the end of this century, according to the best scientific predictions, given the rate of extinctions now, which is unprecedented in human history and recorded history. Can you see the graph, the whole page of the graph, or is our window blocking it?
Nope, it should see have the whole page up. So
yeah, okay. Basically, what's going on now is that if you look on the left-hand side of the page, this is from the book, you'll see that in the last half century, from the 1970s till now, 7 out of every 10 of the large wild vertebrates, animals with backbones, have disappeared. This is just total numbers, not species, but total numbers. Where there were 10, there are now 3 in a very short time. And there are right now 96% of the biomass of all the mammals on the planet, on the only living planet we know, it consists of humans and their livestock. And 4% consists of our remaining wild animals. People are still talking about compromises, and I think it's clear from that graph that we're pretty well beyond that. Why? This is a logarithmic curve. It shows that 10,000 years ago, Homo sapiens, us, which arose 300 to 350,000 years ago, we hit our first million about 10,000, 12,000 AD. We hit our first billion all the way over on the other side of the graph in 1800. And since then it's just skyrocketed. It's gone vertical. And when I was in college studying how to practice conservation, there were fewer than half as many people in the world. And the number of animals was half again as large. And anyway, it's a transformative era. And I don't think we've quite absorbed the fact that we have almost 8 billion people on this planet, and they all happened in a very short time. So the whole balance of ecosystems on this planet is under unprecedented pressure. We're terraforming this planet. We're changing the seas. We're changing the composition of the air and the temperatures. And we're taking over. The human footprint extends across about 83% of the planet at this point. So this isn't a series of or a number of environmental crises or individual problems we need to address. This is the only living planet we know. This is the Earth having a stroke as far as its life support system. So I've been off happily doing stories on big charismatic critters like snow leopards, the last grizzly bears in the Gobi Desert, about 3 dozen left, on great whales. And I was talking about a grizzly brushing against me. I once found myself in the subantarctic trying to push a 80-ton right whale off my head. I was underwater with a snorkel and this thing just settled down on top of me. And of course I didn't push it off me. I pushed myself down and got the heck out of there before a single stroke of its fluke would have knocked me senseless. It's been fun. It's been enlightening. It's been a joy to be able to do this. And I owe a lot to National Geographic for kind of a nonstop tour of the world's great fauna. But I've been writing books and stories about individual species and individual places. And it's pretty clear, finally, well, I'm kind of slow, realize that I don't have time. Look at the white hair. I don't have time to keep doing this one by one. And none of us have time to keep running around sticking our fingers in the dike in the holes when the rate of extinction and loss is so great. So what might change it? I think the only answer I could come up with is we don't see nature for what it is, and we don't see ourselves for what we are. And so our relationship with nature is based on a lot of historical assumptions, the human need to think of ourselves as separate and superior. It's just we have a view that worked really well for us, right? We do genes, we also do memes. We pass on learned information. We're wonderfully creative and manipulative, and nobody does genes and intelligent tinkering like we do. And it's been great. And now the point is that we're the greatest threat to a comfortable future for ourselves and to all the other living organisms on the planet. What worked for us when we numbered 8 million or 80 million or even 800 million doesn't work when there are 8,000 million of us on this planet. So we need to rethink things, and science has already told us that our assumptions and our view of nature is kind of off base. It's incomplete. And I wanted to try to get across as much of those findings as I could in a book. And luckily, when I was about 7 or 8, my dad gave me a microscope, old style, old school microscope, but tremendously powerful. He was a geologist and looked at minerals. I looked at things I took out of my ears and off my scabs, and pond water, a drop of pond water, and it opened up a universe to me. It opened up wonders beyond counting. It opened up things. This is the Euglenus, a single-celled organism that has a tail and an eye spot, but it's also stuffed full of chloroplasts. It photosynthesizes. So is it a plant or animal? I don't know. It's called a protist. It's in that big, varied group of single-celled creatures that blur all the boundaries that we've set up for categories of species. This is not a fungus. This is a slime mold. And the name mold makes you think it's a fungus. It's actually an amoeba. And it exists as single cells that you can't see on the forest floor. And under certain conditions, all those cells gather into a mass, and they go oozing, creeping amoeba-like across the forest floor, like spilled jelly. I mean, they get this big, reaching out, not tentacles, but pseudopods, false feet, and testing things and then oozing that direction. People have called it an animal. They've called it a fungus. They've called it a really strange plant. And now it's classified as an amoeba, but a multi-celled amoeba. It's anyway, the idea is there's a lot of wonder and a lot of strangeness out there, more than we realize if you know how to look. And this is called, since I have grizzlies in this, this is a water bear, also called a moss piglet. It's a tardigrade. These are the ones they're putting into space and putting outside the space vehicle, exposed to the freezing cold and cosmic rays of the universe. And then you bring them back in, put them in water, they're fine. You can radiate them, you can freeze them, you can put them in boiling water, and lately they've been shooting them out of guns. And these things come back. No one knows exactly what kind of animal they are. They're next to invisible, they're microscopic. Anyway, so that's the wonder of the world through the lens. And it taught me a big lesson when I was young, which is that most of the living world is invisible. And a pinch of soil has billions of bacteria, fungal threads, and strange creatures like these tardigrades. Mm-hmm. And then, while I'm on the subject of geeking everybody out, this is how we've seen the coronavirus, right? The pandemic days. The fact is, I hope this is reassuring rather than scary, but they calculate that 800 million viruses fall onto each square yard of ground and water every day. So we're surrounded by microbes and viruses. We have wonderful immune systems that take care of most of it. But this is the living world. It's the planet of the microbes by far. So now I'm trying to combine that with the big animals I've spent a lifetime looking at and learning about. They're already combined, and let me get towards that. I've done stories on corals all over the world, and corals are a polyp. A lot of people think they're plants, but they're a polyp. They're like a sea anemone, roughly related to jellyfish and other things. But they get their color and they get their energy and food from algae that live inside their tissues. So they're a symbiotic creature, like a lichen, which is a combination of a fungus and an algae. The fungus extracts nutrients from the debris, the bark, the stone, wherever it is, the minerals, and the algae photosynthesizes, and the fungus gets a sip of that, and the algae gets a nice moist home to be in. So let's call them a joint venture. They're a partnership, and scientists call it a symbiosis. Now let's look at a tree. Look at a piece of grass, look at a shrub, look at something in your garden box. And we see what we call a tree. But in that tree are all these cells, and inside all these green cells, the green color comes from chloroplasts. So this is like high school biology, right? They do the job of photosynthesis. They eat sunlight, turn it into starch and sugar. Well, those chloroplasts are another organism. They're actually a modified cyanobacterium. So way back 2 million years ago, in the days when everything on Earth was one cell big at most, a big microbe ate a smaller one, and instead of digesting it, they formed a partnership for reasons no one quite knows how to explain, but maybe the extra energy or food did the bigger critter some good. And anyway, this is now in every plant, every green plant. It's the basis of the food chain. It's a cyanobacterium that runs, whole ecosystems. On top of that, if we go back to that tree, you see the roots at the bottom. Those roots are the size of the woody parts, the woody branches we see. And then they have root hairs that extend out farther, and attached to the root hairs are mycorrhizal fungi, which are invisible threads of fungus that form a symbiosis with the root hairs of 90% of the plants on the planet, 90% of the known species. And they extend the reach of that tree by an order of magnitude, by 10 times. And they extract water and nutrients from pores that are too tiny and from rocks that the rootlets can't gain nutrients from. And they bring it back to the tree, and in return, they get a little sip of that sugar that comes from the chloroplasts producing food. So anyway, this is a community. What is a tree? What is a coral reef? And then what are we? So if you start learning to look, and you might want to look inside yourself. This is my baby picture. This is a fertilized egg in the process of being fertilized. So I started life at 4 1,000ths of an inch in diameter. There were bacteria bigger than I was, but I had plans, and they were encoded in 22,000 genes. Some of them were old before life came out of the sea, and some of them are fairly new. 22,000 human genes. I turned into I'm going to say 175 pounds because you can't see my gut right now.
Mhm.
So I have about 30 trillion human cells in me. I have more microbes in me than that. I have thousands of species in my gut. I have at least 1,000 in my mouth. I've got them in all the damp spots. You do too. I'm not judging,
Mhm.
but we host this incredible fauna, and people know about the microbiome. I'm hearing a lot more, I'm sure you are too, about probiotics, about the balance in your systems. They're doing our digestion, a lot of it. They're defending us against other microbes, and they're also producing hormones. And scientists are starting to look into both the health effects of our microbiome, but also the fact that they may be influencing our moods and therefore our thoughts. So these are these would be typical gut bacteria. And then the final part is inside each of my human cells are these little organisms called mitochondria. So I'm sorry if we're back in high school class again, but it's important because I learned about mitochondria in high school biology. I did not learn that they are modified bacteria, and they are the energy plants of every cell of every plant and animal. I shouldn't have said energy plants. They're the batteries of every plant and animal. They are the life force. They're as close to the spark of life as you can get. We can't move, think, feel, or exist without mitochondria. We have several in most cells. We have as many as 2,000 in really busy, important cells like the kidney and liver that are doing a lot of different functions. So I am a symbiont with mitochondria, with all these microbes inside me. And, you know, I think of myself, I act as a I, me, mine, you know, I'm in that frame of mind, but I function as an us. And virtually every creature out there above the size of bacteria does. It's a partnership. So when we talk about nature, science has done a great job of dividing creatures into categories, and it's a way to understand them. It's perfectly understandable. We're really good at that. That's how we're wired. But to understand nature and then to translate that into conservation, it's time to start putting all those parts and pieces and categories back together, because that's the nature of nature. It's a partnership, and it's all about connections. So, and now take a look at ecosystems again. What supports the incredible biomass of, you know, look, we're looking at zebras, wildebeest, Thompson's gazelles, but you know, this is a classic African plain and national Serengeti and national park. And we naturally focus on critters this size, and those are the ones that affected our survival for, you know, hundreds of thousands of years. We had to pay attention. If we were looking at all these, or aware of all these microbes, we'd be going, we'd be so scattered we wouldn't get anything done. But how do they exist in a grassland that's subject to drought in these numbers? Why? How can it be that productive? And to understand that, I mentioned there are 4,600 species of mammals on the planet. 85% of the animals on the planet that have been identified so far are insects. And the number of beetle species alone is over 400,000. And here they're recycling dung on an African plain. And they're building the fertility, taking the droppings of these animals, recycling them, building the fertility of the grasses, and nourishing that ecosystem. In the acacia trees that are scattered across an African plain, okay, you've got chloroplasts in the and mitochondria in the leaves, and you've got some ants crawling around. I'm funny. I'm pointing at them like you could see me doing that. But anyway, the acacia grows special thorns that are inflated or just expanded, and they form nests for these ants. And in turn, the ants deter other insects and things that are going to come in and eat the acacia. And on top of that, there are bacteria living in specialized pockets on the ants' feet that get tracked across all the leaves as the ants travel around. And those are antibiotic, antifungal compounds getting spread over the acacia. And finally, you see termite mounds everywhere in the African plain. You see them throughout the tropics and subtropics. And we know about termites, and I think most people know they don't actually digest wood. They're recycling all that cellulose from grasses, shrubs, and trees. But the digestion is being done, we always said, by protozoans within the gut of the termites. And recently they found not quite. The digestive enzymes are coming from bacteria that live on the cell walls of the protozoans inside the termites that recycle the nutrients in this ecosystem. So that's probably enough examples, maybe more than enough for some folks. But in the ocean, it's the same story. You know, we see that these are Mobular Rays in Baja in a big migratory mass, and they kind of look like this one over here, sort of like a stealth fighter, you know, when they're leaping from the water. But they're all depending on the small guys. These are diatoms, which are sometimes called algae that live in glass houses because they form protective cases of silicon. And here you have a, cathedral-sized whale, the biggest creature ever, the blue whale, 100 tons, 100 and some feet long. But the wonders in the sea go from that to these tiny little, I just had to show this picture because I'm in love with it, but these are called sea angels, and they're actually a sea slug, but pure magic. And anyway, that's how oceans work. And I worked a lot on coral systems and also with different species of whales. So I spent a lot of time on boats, and I got to know a lot of islands. And this photo is to start a view of, there are, oh God, it knows 4,000 some identified islands, maybe more than that, but they are where at least 70% of the extinctions on the planet have taken place since the year 1500. Why? It's because they're isolated. The plants and animals that get out there are on their own. If there's disease, storms, hurricane, whatever, cyclones, hurricanes, they have nowhere to go, and they don't have any options. And so there were still incredible life forms hanging at the same time. Because they're isolated, they change over time, and you have more unique or so-called endemic species on islands than anywhere else. A lot of unusual creatures that have hung on. But then humans came in their boats doing what we do, one of the things we do best, which is explore and look for wonders in new territory. Unfortunately, we brought along rats, house mice, goats, dogs, cats, and the animals on the islands got displaced. And so high rates of extinctions, and rats are probably the worst culprits of all because they eat plant, animal, everything, and especially birds, because a lot of birds have rookeries on these remote islands, which were always safe. This is a puffin, the albatross, and terns and their chicks. 70% of the seabirds have been lost in the last half century, and rats are a huge part of it. Well, there's a group called Island Conservation that I met during my sea voyages, and they are going around from island to island. They've calculated out there's 41% of the most critically endangered species on planet Earth are on islands, oceanic islands. And if we could just remove the invasive species that people have brought on 700 and some islands, we could save 41% of the most imperiled critters we have. That's getting a lot done in a hurry and cheap, because that's exactly what island conservation does. It's based in Santa Cruz, but they work all over the world, and they've already worked on dozens and dozens of islands. And it's been magic. Within a couple of years of the removal of the invasive species, the air is full of wings again. The coral is growing better around the islands because the guano, the bird poop, is washing offshore and fertilizing it. And plants that were thought extinct pop up out of the soil from long dormant seeds. So I wanted to show in the book what works, instead of bemoaning the kind of sometimes terrifying things that are happening to the planet. Now back to bears at the end. This is 4/5 me and my maternal side, my feminine side, obviously, but bears have led us to view nature differently than we did in another way. Most big mammals today the reason they're disappearing is the natural areas they have left are small and isolated from one another. So they're like oceanic islands, and that means extinctions happen more readily. And most of the brown bears, the same as grizzlies, Ursus arctos, from Pakistan to, I've seen them in the top of the Himalayas, work with them in the Gobi Desert. Most of these are island populations. But here in North America, we've actually successfully turned things around. And that's because we have the Endangered Species Act, and recovering bears required the different government agencies from federal, state, local, county, and so on to start talking to each other and managing a bigger landscape than they were used to doing. Everyone used to look out for their own turf, but bears are so wide-ranging and use all kinds of habitats that they required people to think in terms of ecosystems, and large and connected. And that made a big difference. So they drove the what used to be thought of as, can we save bears in Yellowstone Park, is now bears in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which is 18 million acres instead of 2 million, are doing better. They're coming back. And to save this species over the long term, we have the Yellowstone to Yukon Conservation Initiative. This is another can-do, not long-term, it's long-term by our standards, but I mean, this is something we can do in a hurry. And that is connect the wonderful collection of parks and preserves that already exist along the Rockies down to Colorado, where you are, Adam, and then up to the Peel River in the Yukon. The Yellowstone to Yukon actually just goes south into the Wind Rivers from Wyoming, but it needs to go down to Colorado quick. Mm-hmm. Anyway, you can see the change from historic times, and Yellowstone to Yukon is the one outlined in black here. And that is where the big, majestic, we call them charismatic megafauna, that's where the bulk of our continent's big, wonderful critters remain. It's 2,000 miles north to south. Animals need this length of wildland. It doesn't all have to be strictly protected. It has to be habitat that animals can move through safely. They need to be connected, and call them wildways, but people can be doing certain things and those certain activities in there. It's working with communities as well as, protecting the landscape. So this is one of the biggest challenges taken on as sort of a model for what's going on globally. And here's a close-up look at what's happened from 1993, which is really when the Yellowstone to Yukon initiative got started, to connect and protect these reserves. This is Banff, Jasper. This is Glacier Park, Yellowstone down here. And look, it's working. It's working kind of in a very cooperative way. Again, it brings people together, deciding on how best to use the land, but also leave it open to wildlife so they can adapt to changes, adapt to what's happening with the climates, wildfires, whatever. They need that freedom to roam if they're to exist over time. Otherwise, you've got an archipelago of islands that may or may not make it in a sea of increasing humankind. And there's just simple things you can do too. Like this is the Trans-Canada Highway through Banff, and it used to be a slaughterhouse for wildlife. And they started putting in these, I call them bridges for four-legged pedestrians, but overpasses planted with natural vegetation. It took a couple of years. The elk and deer went over them right away. It took a couple of years for the wolves and bears to start using them, but now everybody's going across it safely. The overpasses and underpasses, simple, but it's the theme of connectivity. That's the main part. And lastly, here's one simple way to look at conservation for me. Do you want to be healthier? Do you want to live longer? Well, folks, get on down to the nearest store of nature, because I was in Japan recently where they do forest bathing, and that means immersing yourself in nature with all your senses, usually old growth forest in Japan, but it can be a garden, it can be an urban park, it can be a neighborhood vacant lot. But time outdoors in contact with nature has, in scientific studies across Europe, the US, and in Asia, been shown to lower blood pressure, decrease the heart rate, slow it down, increase the activity of the immune system, and lower stress as measured by cortisol and adrenaline, stress hormones, and increase cognitive awareness, your thinking abilities. You go from concentrated, intense kind of focus to a relaxed awareness. And in study after study, the health benefits are very, very clear. And they find people who spend more time outdoors live longer, which I guess goes right along with better health. But I think conservationists are missing a huge opportunity here. If we're trying to convince people to save animals because they're beautiful. That works for some people. We tried to say, maybe this plant has the cure for cancer, let's not lose it. And that works for others. But at the same time, a lot of people think, oh, we'll come up with some other high-tech solution or something. But if you go outdoors for 20 minutes 3 times a week, you will be healthier. That's not much, right? That's nothing. And you will live longer. What more can you ask for? Now, why does this happen? I don't know. I haven't been able to find an answer to that. But the assumption is we as hominids have been evolving for millions of years. And as Homo sapiens for, like I said, 350,000 years. And we never went out into the wild because everything was wild. And this is where we were shaped and formed, and our sympathetic, this is a little technical, but it's our sympathetic and parasympathetic, our fight and flight versus our rest and relaxation systems in our physiology respond immediately to it. And it's just, we're adapted to it. And so this is the nature embedded in us, just as we've always been embedded in nature. And I think that's probably a good place to end, because I probably had some wrap up, but I'm just going to close with this. You can read it for yourself, but I'll read it aloud. Being one with nature sounds like an aspiration. It really isn't, because we already are. So that's the show, folks.
Well,
I'll go back to just a stop share. There we go.
perfect. Well, just a few questions. You know,
Why? I didn't cover much ground. I don't know why.
I mean, I just want to wrap up with 2-3 questions. You know, you mentioned like, when you first started your career, when you first started looking at nature and you were looking at animals, were people in your community talking about like the invisible world, these micro, was that even a thing 30 years ago, 40 years ago? When did that kind of come in your world?
No, it was by, what was it, late 1980s, there were still biologists trying to convince other biologists that the mitochondria and the chloroplasts and the things I mentioned are actively bacteria. It took modern sophisticated molecular analyses to show some of these relationships. And a lot of the symbioses I mentioned have only been found in the last few years. If you pick apart a strawberry, you find that I love strawberries, but the taste and the flavor they come from bacteria in the plant's tissues that make precursor chemicals for the flavor, and they live off methane given off by the plant. And that was discovered like 3 years ago. And so, you know, the fuller picture is just coming in, and it's all telling us that you can't separate things in nature. And I'm trying to build on that to say our illusion that we are separate from nature, we're somehow liberated from it. We're smart enough. We see it as freeing ourselves, because we see nature as a step down. It's like bestial. It's like animals. You know, we still use that expression. They behave like animals. And it's like, no, this makes us bigger. This makes us more than human. This is our greater selves. And to me, it's like, yeah, I just gained a whole lot of friends and companions. I mean, or kin. I don't know why. I mean, it is a positive thing in terms of how ecosystems function and what makes us healthy and happy and able to find enough resources. Is nature at work. But we still are fighting. We've set up all these barriers over time for various reasons. And if those don't come down, I don't know if we're going to have much left in the way of companion life. And I don't think we'll have a very comfortable future. So that's the point.
And then, you know, 4/5 of Grizzly, you opened with a lot of like, we are, I mean, the whole point of this was we are nature. We are, we have to stop looking at it as like we run the planet. We're just a very small part of it. We created Zoom, so we think we're special.
Well, when it works, it's pretty special. Yeah.
What interests you next? I mean, are you going to continue down this path of we are Nate? Are you going to like, what are you going to work on next? What's interesting you?
I guess that's a really good question. The last thing I did during the pandemic while I was finishing this book was work with people who have wildlife detection dogs, and they use them for conservation. It's a really nice nice connection there, because they get these dogs from shelters. So some of these dogs might be doomed or, you know, not have a very good life. They pick out ones that respond a certain way, really want to work, really want to play with the ball for a reward, and they train them, and they head off to do things like detect invisible zebra mussels in boats. Zebra mussels are taking over aquatic systems across the country. There's a real headache. It costs, whether you care about what happens to the native species when they get in an aquatic system, they'll clog your boat motors, they'll clog the intake to power plants, they'll clog your irrigation system. And so there's now dogs on patrol stations. When you have to check in when you're on the highway. If you're towing a boat, they'll find the zebra mussel. They'll also find rare cats, wild cats in Central America. They'll find rare bears in China. There are grizzly bears around here. They'll go out and do surveys with these dogs finding droppings and hair. This is a nose that can detect, parts per billion of molecules. And it's also our best friend. So it kind of bridges the gap between some of the geek science and the wow factor of things you can't see. But gosh, the idea of putting it to work for conservation fascinated me. That was a digital story in National Geographic. And I want to follow up on that. And beyond that, I don't know about you. You said you do some writing, Adam, but when I get done with a book, I really, people ask, what's your next book? And it's like, I'm never writing again. I'm just going to go play for a while until I get my head back.
Well, the good thing is you can get outdoors and move on with nature. Douglas Chadwick, author of 4/5 of Grizzly. Thank you so much for being here with Tattered Cover virtually. Thank you so much. I hope you have a great night. I hope all the readers who joined had a great night. And thank you, everyone. You can buy 4/5 of Grizzly at tatteredcover.com.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. And and thanks again to, I don't get to see the audience and they have to look at my mug. I'm sorry about that. But, I wish you all well, and I wish you lots of time outdoors.
Yeah. All right, everyone, have a great one. Thanks, Chad.
You bet. Bye-bye. Thanks, Adam. Mm-hmm. You want me to stay on a little bit, or?
Yeah, that's perfect. I ended the live stream. That was great. Thank